ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। ॐ अखण्डमण्डलाकारं व्याप्तं येन चराचरं तत्पदं दर्शितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। Shivom friends, so today we are going to read chapter 68 onwards of third book on Utpatti Khanda in Yoga Vasishtha Maharamayana, and in this book there is a story in this chapter of Demoness, Karkati, Vishuchika and Suchi. Her Tapas. Here Vishuchika is also called Cholera and Suchi is called the needle. Vasishtha said, "Hear me relate to you, Ram, an old story bearing upon this subject and relating to a difficult question that was resolved by a Rakshasi. There lived on north of Himalaya a heinous Rakshasi named Karkati, a crude crab who was as dark as ink and as stalwart as a rope, with limbs strong enough to split the sturdy oak. She was also known as Vishuchika or choleric pain, by which she was ever afflicted, and which had reduced her frame like that of Vindhya hill, which was pushed down by the curse of Agastya Rishi. Her eyeballs were blazing like fires, her stature reaching halfway to the sky. She was covered by a blue garment like the shade of night wrapping the atmosphere. A white cloak covered her head like a cloud fragment. The long erect hairs of her head stood like a dark cloud on her crest. Her eyes flashed like lightning and her sharp hooked nails glistened like sapphires. Her legs were as long as tamara trees, and her loud laughter was like a burst of frost. A string of dried bones decorated her body like a wreath of flowers. Traces of dead bodies adorned every part of her body. She frolicked in the company of Vetal ghosts, with human skulls hanging down her ears like earrings. When she stretched out her arms, she looked like she was going to pluck the sun from his sphere. Her huge body lacked its necessary food, causing her stomach fire to blaze like an undersea flame that the waters of the deep are unable to quench. Nothing could ever satisfy the insatiable hunger of this big-bellied monster, or satisfy her licking tongues that was always stretched out like a flame of fire. She thought to herself, "Oh, if just once I could to the land of Asia, I would devour all its men in one swoop and feast on them continually like an undersea fire upon the waters." As clouds cool burning sands by their rain, so will I allay the burning fire of my hunger there. It is settled as the best plan to support my life at this critical moment. All men are well guarded by their mantras, medicines, austerities, devotions, and charities from all evils of the world. Therefore, it is impossible for anybody to destroy the indestructible devotee. I will perform the most rigorous austerities with an unflinching heart and mind, because it is by intensity of effort that we may gain what is otherwise hard to be had. Having thought so, she went to an inaccessible mountain for the purpose of destroying all animal beings. She climbed to the top of the mountain, scrambling over it with her hands and feet, and stood on it with her body looking a cloud and her eyeballs flashes like lightning. Having reached the summit, she made her ablution and then sat in her tapa. Her steadfast eyeballs resembled the two orbs of the sun and moon fixed on one object. She passed many a day and month there and saw the course of many a season and year. She exposed her huge body to the rigor of heat and cold, like the hill itself. She, with her huge black body, remained unmoved as a thick dark cloud on the mountain top. Her jet black ears stood up as if to touch the sky. Seeing her body beaten by the blast and covered with nothing but her ragged skin, and her hairs standing up to their end, tossed to and fro by the raging winds, while the twinkling of her eyelids shed a wheatish glare on her dark frame, God Brahma appeared before her. So this is the only story covered in chapter 68, and in chapter 69 it is being continued, where Brahma declares Karkati's tap complete, grants her boon to be a pin to cause pain. Vasishtha resumed. After the passing of 1,000 years, Brahma appeared to Karkati in order to put an end to the intensity of her austerities and crown her with success and the reward of her tap. She saluted him internally in her mind and remained fixed in her position, thinking about the boon she should beg of him for allaying her keen appetite. She soon recollected a certain request which she should present to her complying God. It was to transform her soft and flexible form to the shape of an inflexible iron needle with which she could torment all living beings. So a Rakshasi is only thinking of tormenting others. At Brahma's bidding, she thought in herself, I will become as thin as a minute pin in order to enter imperceptibly into the hearts of animals like the fragrance of flowers enters the nostrils. By this means will I suck blood from the heart of beings to my heart satisfaction. In this way, my hunger will be satisfied and my appetite gratified to the greatest delight of my soul. As she was thinking in this manner, the god discovered her sinister motive, contrary to the character of a yogi, and approached her with a voice resembling the roaring of clouds. Brahma said, "Daughter Karkati of the Rakshas race, who sits here like a cloud on the inaccessible top of this mountain, know that I am pleased with your tap, and bid you now to raise yourself and receive the boon that you desire of me." Karkati answered, "O Lord of the past and future, if you are inclined to grant my request, then please confer on me the boon of transforming my un-iron-like body to the form of an iron needle." Vashiji said. The god pronounced, "Be it so," and added, "You will be like a pin, Suchi, and you shall be called choleric pain, Vishuchika, because you give pain to all bodies. You shall be the cruel cause of acute pain to all living beings, particularly to the intemperate and hard-working fools and loose libertines who are destined to be your devoted victims. Moreover, shall you molest the dwellers of unhealthy districts and the practitioners of malpractices by entering their hearts with your infectious breath, and by disturbing their sleep and deranging the liver and other intestinal parts of the body. You shall be of the form of wind and cause bile and flatulence under the different names of colic diseases, and attack the intemperate both among the wise and unwise. The wise, when attacked by you, will be healed by repeating this magical mantra, which I will here propound for their benefits. The mantra runs thus: There lives Karkati, the Rakshasi, in the north of the snowy mountain. Her name is Vishuchika, and it is for repelling her power that I repeat this mantra. Om. I bow to Hiring, Hrang, and Ring. Rung, and invoke the Vaishnavi powers to remove, destroy, root out, drive away this caloric pain far beyond the Himalayas and afar to the orb of the moon. Om and Swaha. Be it so. So this is the mantra that Brahmaji gave for those who are wise, so that they can be free from the choleric pain given by this Rakshasi. Let these lines be tied as an amulet on the left arm. Then rub the painful part with the palm of that hand and think the colic Karkati to be crushed under the mallet of this amulet and driven back beyond the hills with loud wailing. Let the patient think the medicinal moon is seated in his heart and believe himself to be freed from the death and disease, and his faith will save his life and heal his pain. When the attentive adept, who having purified himself with sprinkling water in his mouth, repeats this formula, he succeeds in a short time to remove the colic pain altogether. Then, after delivering this effective amulet to the spiritual masters attending upon him, the Lord of the three worlds disappeared in the air. He went to his splendid seat in heaven, where he was received by God Indra, who advanced to hail him with his praises. So, in this chapter, Brahmaji gave boon to Vishuchika, but uh, at the same time, He gave also the mantra by the repetition of which the wise man can be freed from the pain given by Vishuchika or Suchi or Karkati. These are the three names given to this one Demoness. And in chapter 70, Karkati as Suchi, the needle of Colic and Cholera, what she does is described in this chapter 70. Vasishtha is continuing. Now this Karkati, who had been as tall as a mountain peak and a Rakshasi of the blackest kind, resembling a thick and dark cloud of the rainy season, gradually began to fade away and grow leaner and leaner day by day. Her gigantic cloud-like form was soon reduced to the shape of a tree branch, which afterwards became like the figure of a man, and then the measure of only a cubit. It next became the length of a span in its height, and then of a finger's length in all, growing by degrees thinner and thinner like grain. It became at last as lean as a needle or a pin. Thus, she was reduced to the thinness of a needle, fit only to sew a silken robe, by her own desire that could change a hill to a grain of sand. She had become as lean as the filament of the lotus flower. Thus, the non-metallic Karkati was transformed into the form of Suchi, a black and slender iron needle that contained all her limbs and organs of her body and conducted her in the air anywhere she liked. She saw herself as an iron pin, having neither substance nor length nor breadth of her body. Her mind, with its power of thought, appeared as bright as a golden needle, like a streak of sapphire impregnated by sunshine. Her rolling eyeballs were as dark as the spots of black clouds, moved to and fro by the winds. Her sparkling pupils, piercing through their tenuous pores, gazed at the bright glory of God. She had observed the vow of silence in order to reduce the plumpness of her person, and her face radiated with joy at becoming as lean as the filament of a feather. She saw a light descending on her from the air at a distance, and she was happy to find her inner spirit to be as subtle as the air. With her contracted eyebrows, she saw the rays of light extending to her from afar, which caused the hairs on her body to stand up like those of babies at bathing. Her grand energy channel, called Brahma Nadi or Sushumna, rose up to its cavity in the head, called the Brahmarandra, in order to greet the holy light, like the filaments of the lotus rise to receive sunlight and heat. Having subdued the organs of her senses and their powers, she remained as one without an organic frame and identified with her individual soul. She resembled the intelligent principles of the Buddhists and logicians, which is unseen by others. Her minuteness seemed to have produced the minutiae of minute philosophers called the Siddhantas. Her silence was like that of the wind confined in a cave. Her slender form of a puny pin resembled the breath of animal life, which is imperceptible to the eye. The little that remained of her body was as thin as the last hope of a man. It was like the pencil of an extinguished flame of a lamp that has heat without light. But alas, how pitiable was her folly, which at first She couldn't understand. She was wrong to choose the form of a slender being for herself in order to gratify her insatiable appetite. Her object was to have her food and not the contemptible form of a pin. Her heart desired one thing, and she found herself in another form that was of no use to her purpose. Her silliness led her to make the unwise choice of a needle shape for herself. So short-witted, it is with the short-witted. They lack the sense of judging beforehand about their future good. An arduous attempt to accomplish a desired object is often attended by a different result. Even success on one hand becomes a failure on another. In the same way, a mirror is soiled by the breath while it shows the face to the looker. Howbeit, having renounced her gigantic form, the Rakshasi soon learned to be content with her needle form. Although she viewed her transformations as worse than her dissolution itself. But see the contrary desires of the infatuated, who distaste in a trice what at one time they fondly wished. This fiend was disgusted at her needle form instead of her monstrous figure. As one dish of food is easily replaced by another, suiting the taste of the gourmet, so this fiend did not hesitate to shun her gigantic body, which she took to taste the heart blood of animals in her pin form. Even death is delightful to the giddy when they are over fond of something else. The minimum of a merger of a meager needle was desirable to the monstrous fiend to gratify her fiendish desire. Now this needle took the rarefied form of air and moved like uh, about after all living beings, as the colic wind is in quest of sucking animal gore. Its body was like fiery heat, and its life, the vital breath of animals. Its seat was in the sensitive heart, and it was as swift as the particles of solar and lunar beams. It was as destructive as the blade of a deadly sword, and as fleet as vapors flying in air. It penetrated bodies in the minute form of order. It was ever bent to do evil, like an evil spirit, as she was now known by that name. Her sole object was to kill the lives of others at her pleasure. Her body, divided into two halves, one was as fine as a silken thread, and the other as soft as a thread of cotton. Suchi ranged all about the 10 sides of the world in her two forms and pierced and penetrated into hearts of living beings with all her excruciating pains. Karkati gave up her former big body and took the form of the acute and small needle in order to accomplish all these purposes of her, whether they be great or little. To men of little understanding, a slight business becomes an arduous task. The foolish fiend had recourse to her austerities in order to do the mean work of a needle. Again, however good and great, men can hardly get rid of their natural disposition. The great Rakshasi performed her austere tap in order to become a vile pin for molesting mankind. Now, as Suchi was wandering about in the sky, her aerial form, which was big with her heinous ambition, disappeared in air like vapor, or like a thick cloud in autumn. Then, entering in the body of some sensualist or weak or too fat a person, this inward colic flatulence of Suchi assumes the shape of cholera. Sometimes she enters the body of a lean person, but also in those of healthier and wise people, first appearing as a choleric pain, then becoming real cholera at last. She is often delighted to take her seat in the hearts of the ignorant, but afterwards she is driven back by good acts and prayers and mantras and medicines of the wise. In this manner, she continued many years in her rambles. Sometimes her two-part body, pin and cholera, flies in the air, but most often she creeps low on the ground. She lies concealed in the dust of the ground and under the fisted fingers of hands. She hides herself in the sunbeams, in air, and in the threads of clothes. She is hidden in the intestines, entrails, and genitals. She resides in the bodies of pale and ash-colored persons. She lives in the pores, lines, and lineaments of the body, and also in dry grass and in the dried beds of rivers. She has her seat among the indigents and in the naked and uncovered bodies of men and in those who are subject to hard breathing. She dwells in places infested by flies and of obstructed ventilation, and also in green verdures, excepting only mango and wood apple trees. She lurks in places scattered with bones and joints of animals' bodies, and such as are disturbed by the violent winds and gusts of air. She lies in dirty places and in cold and icy grounds, and likewise in polluted clothes and places polluted by them. She sits in holes and hollow places, withered trees, and spots infested by crows, flies, and peacocks, also in places of dry, humid, and high winds, and in benumbed fingers or and toes. She is in cloudy regions, in cavernous districts of the form of rotten bodies, in regions of melting and driving snows, and in marshy grounds abounding in ant hills and hills of malura trees. She exhibits herself in the mirage of desert sand and in wildernesses abounding with ravenous beasts and snakes. Sometimes she is seen in lands infested by venomous reptiles, disgusting leeches, and worms. She frequents stagnant pools soiled by dry leaves and those chewed by Pishach ghosts. She hunts hovels beside road crossings where passengers halt and take shelter from cold. She rambles in all places, everywhere. Leeches suck the blood of men, and wild people tear them with their nails and hold them in their fists to feed upon them. In this manner, she is everywhere in the landscape of cities until she is tired with her long journey through them. Then she stops in her course like a tired bullock whose body is hot from travelling through towns with loads of cotton and utensils on its back. She lays down to rest in some hidden place, like a needle tired with continued sewing. There she drops down like thread from the hand of the sewer. A hard needle held in the hand of the sewer never hurts his finger, because a servant, however sharp he may be, is never faithless or injurious to his master. An iron needle, grown old in its business of stitching, was at last lost by itself, like the rotten plank of a boat bearing the burdensome ballast of stones in it. It wandered about on all sides of its own accord, and was driven to and fro like chaff by the driving winds, according to the course of nature. Someone takes it up and feeds the last end of a thread in its mouth. The malady of cholera is caught by those human parasites who glut themselves with food supplied by the sap of another. The malady of colic, like the needle, is ever found feeding with its open mouth on the pith of others. It continually finds the thread like heartstring of somebody put into its hole. Thus, the strong bodies of greedy and heinous beings are nourished by the sap of the weak and innocent. Just like colic disease preys on the lean bodies of the poor, and the sharp needle is supported by the thin thread of the needy. Though the heart of Suchi, like the whole of the needle, was to receive the thread like sap of the patient's heart, yet her power to pierce it was like that of the sewing needle, which is as potent as the piercing sunbeams to penetrate into the toughest substance. Suddenly, and at last, Suchi came to find the fault of her wrong choice. For a puny body, which was filled with her canty fare of a bit of thread, she began to repent her folly. However, she continued with all her might to trudge on in her accustomed course of pricking and piercing the bodies of others. In spite of her great regret, she couldn't avoid the cruelty of her nature. The sewing man cuts and sews the cloth agreeably to his own liking, but the weaver of destiny weaves the long loom of lengthened desire in all bodies and hides their reason under the garb of her own making. The colic Suchi went on like the sewing needle in her business of piercing the hearts of people by hiding her head, just like it is the practice of robbers to carry on their rogueries by covering their faces. She, like the needle with the sewing thread behind it, raises her head to make and look at the loophole that she should penetrate, like burglars making and marking holes in the wall for their entry. She entered the bodies of the weak and strong alike, like the needle is stitching clothes of all textures, just as it is the custom of the wicked to spare neither the just nor unjust. Colic pain, like the piercing needle, being pressed under the fingers, lets off its gripping like the thread of the needle in its act of sewing. The acute and unfeeling conic, being as ignorant of the softness and dryness of the object as the stiff and heartless needle, pierces the hardiest breast without deriving any sweetness from it. The needle is comparable to a rich widow. Both are equally stern and full of remorse. Both are equally veiled and speechless, and with their eye of the needle are as empty in their joyless hearts. The needle hurts nobody, yet she dragged by the thread, which is no other than the thread of her fate. After her trudging slipped from the finger of her master, the needle peacefully sleeps in company with her fellows of dirt and dregs. For who is there who, when he is out of work, doesn't deem himself blessed to be in the company of his equals? The herd of common people is ever fond of mixing with the ignorant rebel, because there is nobody who can avoid the company of his equals. The lost needle, when found by a blacksmith and heated in the hearth, flies to heaven by the breath of the billows, after which it disappears in the air. In this manner, the current of vital airs, by force of the acts of its prior state of existence, conducts the breath of life into the heart, which becomes the living spirit. The vital airs, being diminished in the body, causes the colic pain, known by different names such as flatulence, bile, and the like. The colic caused by the spoiling the vyana, vital energy, produces many diseases and affects all the members of the body with a watery fluid. When it affects the lungs breathing, it causes the Vyasula or pulmonary colic, and it is attended by disfigurement of the body and an insanity or hysteria known as the hysteric colic. Sometimes it comes from the hands of sheep keepers or by the smell of sheep's wool in blankets. At other times it seizes the fingers of children and causes them to tear their bed clothes. When it enters the body through the foot, it continues sucking blood and with all its voracity becomes satisfied with very little food. It lies in the glandular vessel of the feces with its mouth placed downwards and takes as its prerogative any form it likes to assume. It is the nature of the malicious people to show the perversion of their hearts by doing injury to others. It is characteristic of base people to raise a row for their pleasure and not for any gain or good to themselves. The miserly think much of their gain of even a single penny. So deeply rooted is the avaricious selfishness of human nature. It was only for a particle of blood, or as much as could be picked out by the point of a pin, that the Colic Suchi was bent on the destruction of men. So the wise are fools in their own interests. How great is my master stroke, says the needle, that I have come from stitching the shreds of clothes to piercing the hearts of men. So be it, and I am happy at my success. As the rust of the lazy needle passes off in sewing without being rubbed with dust, so must it rust unless it is put into the action of piercing patience and passive shreds. The unseen and airy darts of fate are as fatal as the acts of cruel, advanced cholera, though both have their respite of their massacres at short intervals. The needle is at rest after its act of sewing is done, but the wicked are not satisfied even after their acts of slaughter are over. It dives in the dirt and rises in the air. It flies with the wind and lies down wherever it falls. It sleeps in the dust and hides itself at home, and in the inside, and under the clothes and leaves. It dwells in the hand and ear holes, in lotuses and heaps of woolen stuffs. It is lost in the holes of houses, in clefts of wood, and underneath the ground. Valmiki ji added, as the sage was speaking in this manner, the sun went down in the west, and the day departed to its evening service. The assembly broke after mutual salutations to perform their sacred ablution, and joined again on the next morning with the rising beams of the sun to the royal palace. With this chapter 70 also ends, and we will rest our today's reading session here itself. By grace of Lord Ram, we will again meet tomorrow with chapter 71, in which Suchi's remorse is described. Until then, Shivoham, friends.